They just reset how money works, and I'm preparing right now. Something changed. Something changed just 3 weeks ago. It's nothing in the Bitcoin price. It's nothing in new regulation. It's something in the plumbing with money that I think everybody is not noticing. And the banking system has been secretly working behind the scenes to make sure that this plumbing has been changed. And in order to do that, the government is actually working very closely with all of this. I'm going to connect the dots with what the hell is going on right now, but I can't just tell you because you won't believe me. I'm going to have to show you step by step so you can see with your own eyes, because you'll see how Circle, JPMorgan, Tether, and the government is all connected in changing the plumbing. But first, we've got to start with what the hell is going on with Circle, because you have to understand why I just said that they're going to reset how your money works. And you'll understand why I'm preparing, because I'm going to show you what happened 3 weeks ago. And then I'll dive into how JP Morgan and everybody else is distracted from this. But let's look at what everything happened on December 12th, because Circle became a banking charter. It received approval from the US to become a national trust bank. It means that its reserves are now under federal bank level oversight. And I've been covering this for a long time, but the fact that this has changed, I think, is more on the banking side of things, because custody and settlement infrastructure will now sit inside the US banking system. So before, stablecoins used to be a third party that was outside of the banking system, right? It was a privatized company issuing these stablecoins that had various regulations. Now they're becoming a part of the plumbing of the overall US federal system, right? The monetary network. Stablecoins are now ingraining themselves in them. So stablecoins aren't, like I said, replacing the banks, but they're now going to be wired into them. And what I think is really interesting is that Circle and Tether have been now looking for that approval of the OCC National Trust Charter. Now, I know what you might be thinking, like, what the hell does that even mean? But what it does and what it proves is essentially Circle and Tether really have been working closely with regulators to try to get more regulation across the stablecoin industry so they can get approved for whatever tasks that they want. And this is where I think it gets very interesting, because Trump, Tether, and Circle are all very closely aligned. And now they're looking for that federal oversight and to become that banking charter. And the big guys are seeing this as well. There's a big reason why one of the first things that Donald Trump and his new regime just did when when Trump became president again was to go through the stablecoin bill and get the Genius Act passed right away. Because now all of these stablecoins now have the banking charters and are now able to essentially issue those payments back and forth, which I think is a huge part to all of this. Because when you keep going through and look at December 12th being a huge monumental moment for stablecoins and the way that the payment rails are changing here rapidly, because now we're going to be looking at how this is going to change the plumbing and the overall system here, because it's something that is huge, right? Because when we dive in, that the Circle receiving this conditional approval from the OCC, most people are going to scroll past this, right? They're going to look at Circle's official press release here and say, oh, it's not like a bank, right? They're just going to be bank adjacent. No, they became a bank, federally regulated under the OCC oversight. Now, I think a lot of people are actually thinking, hey, great, this is regulation. This is bringing legitimacy to the Bitcoin and crypto industry. But here's what I don't think that a lot of people are really keeping close eye on, right? Is the founding fathers of the United States were always saying very negative things about banks in general, right? And so now these stablecoins and the Bitcoin industry, once they start to partner and become these banks, they are now being into the federal oversight of banks, which I think is extremely dangerous, right? Because now you have to go through the same bank rules. The same bank rules that froze Canadian truckers' accounts, the same bank rules that have the big and heavy KYC, know your customer checks on every transaction, the same that lets you freeze your money without zero warning. And this is where it gets actually worse because Circle isn't the only one, right? It's also Coinbase pursuing this OCC charter. We've got Tether and we've got others, right? So when you see who else got approved at the exact same time, I'm going to show you something about Tether that's going to blow your mind here because Circle got approved on November 12th, but nobody was talking about it because they weren't the only ones. Ripple also got this, right? So Ripple is one of those companies that essentially has been issuing that XRP and one of those other stable coins, right? And the reason I think that this is interesting is because all the XRP bros will tell you, hey, they've been looking at, becoming these banking charters and everything. But essentially, they are two of the biggest stablecoin issuers becoming banks at the same time. And personally, I don't believe in coincidences because this isn't Circle deciding to get regulated. This is essentially the blueprint of how these crypto bros are going to come in, and it's going to be, what I like to think is a backdoor CBDC, because this is where they're changing the rules and changing the plumbings of all of this. The Genius Act passed in July of 25, and the Genius Act literally stands for Guiding and Establishing National Improvement for U.S. Stablecoins Act. So Trump signed that into law, so it created that framework for all the stablecoins to become banks. So Circle, Ripple, they're just doing what they're doing to comply. But Tether is where I think it gets really interesting because it's not just Circle and Ripple for all of this, right? It's Tether that has the closest ties to the U.S. government. Because who controls Tether? Because when you see the answer to this question, everything changes, right? Tether, most people think it's an offshore crypto company. It's run by, Apollo Arduino. But if you look at this headline, the commerce nominee, Howard Lubnick, would give 132 billion stablecoin Tether a boost in the cabinet, right? So Howard Lubnick and Tether have had a very close connection for quite some time. So much so that even Elizabeth Warren has given him grief about all of this. And you might be asking yourself, wait, a commerce secretary, as in Trump's commerce secretary? Cantor Fitzgerald served as the main custodian for Tether U.S. Treasury bills, which are their primary asset backing Tether's stablecoin. And this has been going on for a while, folks. So he's been the CEO since 1991. He left Cantor Fitzgerald and essentially went over to the U.S. government. So Cantor Fitzgerald manages the majority of Tether's reserves asset, including $80 billion of its treasury securities. That's $80 billion. That's not just a partner, folks. And this is where it gets even crazier, right? Because Tether has a very close association with the U.S. government, right? Because it's gotten Bo Hines to lead the stablecoin bill here. It's got the USAT, which it has Bo Hines working all behind it. And it created a full-on U.S. compliant stablecoin after already developing potentially the most used stablecoin in the world in USDT. So why do they need to use a separate stablecoin in order to meet the United States regulations? Were they doing something else? Who knows, right? But Lutnick he owns 5% stake in Tether. So let's get this straight. He was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. He owns 5% of Tether, and Cantor Fitzgerald custodies $80 billion worth of Tether's reserves. And now he's Trump's commerce secretary and member of Trump's working group on the digital asset market. So the group is tasked with proposing a regulatory framework governing digital assets, including stablecoins. So the guy who owns part of Tether, who custodies Tether's reserves, is on the government that is writing stablecoin regulations. And it gets even more insane because when you look at Bo Hines moved from the government to Tether. And they're saying, oh, hey, this just says we're looking to work with these regulators here. And this is where I think like people get a little bit confused here, because this is the development of flipping the entire banking system on its head. And this is where I think the banks are starting to see how Tether and these stable coins are going to be used going forward, because Tether and USDC or Circle have been known to freeze accounts. In fact, we just saw it here with President Maduro at Venezuela. He was using Tether in order to accept a lot of his oil purchases from other countries because, at the same time, they were sanctioned by the United States. So allegedly, with all of this craziness going on, I did a live stream on this yesterday, but Venezuela could have a stockpile of over 600,000 Bitcoin. Why were they doing this? Why did they have this? Well, because the US was sanctioning them off. So they were utilizing Tether to accept their payments, and 80% of all of Venezuelans' foreign trade for oil was being used in Tether. 80%. And then they were using mixing services to now pick up, and get Bitcoin when it was at like $4,000 a coin. So Venezuela has been in this game for a while, and they've been using Tether, which is one of the easiest on and off ramps in order to get access to the Bitcoin markets very quickly. So they were using this, but something really fishy that, Jamie Dimon has kind of flipped the script on. And you guys let me know in the chat if I have AV, because I've gotten some notifications that it hasn't been working very well. But Jamie Dimon said something here interesting. And for those of you guys who've been following, you know that he's been flipping on his head. So Jamie Dimon, for those who missed it, says crypto is better than the current financial system. He says blockchain has been around a while, and this is what this banking system is going to focus on. I mean, even Trump has pointed it out, right? That the current financial system is outdated and it needs to be replaced for a crypto-based one, which is essentially setting the scene for stablecoins and quote unquote blockchain technology to now come in. But they're doing this on the backs of potentially centralized blockchains, and they're avoiding using things like Bitcoin, at least initially. I'm going to dive into how Jamie Dimon and the banking system is doing this. But if you want to find a way to get out of the current banking system, you need to be holding Bitcoin. The best way to do that is with Salt. They're offering you guys an exclusive offer. If you go to saltlending.com/green-candle or the link down in the description, while you're down there, check out the other great sponsors I've got. But go down to saltlending.com/green-candle. They're going to give you some of the best rates in the industry when they got no credit checks, no prepayment fees. And they're giving you guys an exclusive offer for Green Candle listeners. So be sure you go to my link, because if you just go to Salt, you won't get that exclusive offer. Now, taking it a step further on how the banking system is looking at this, JPMorgan is developing their own JPM coin. And they're doing this on the back of blockchain technology, right? He's called Bitcoin a fraud, but now JPMorgan is making blockchain history, right? Betting this crypto winter will be short-lived. Yeah, sure. Whatever they say, right? Because the way Jamie Dimon is looking at this, they're looking at Circle becoming a bank, Ripple becoming a bank, Tether controlled by the Commerce Secretary's family. Now, JPMorgan has tokenized dollars and is quietly rewiring how Wall Street moves money. Look at this article headline. This is not me saying this, right? And they are linked to its $10 trillion per day payments engine to Coinbase's Coinbase's base blockchain. That's $10 trillion of payments per day. So this is not just exploring blockchain or testing it. This is now JPMorgan officially building that infrastructure in order to use something like Coinbase's network and their own network in order to control the plumbing of the system. Because now they've developed their own coin, the JPM coin, and it runs on their blockchain called, I don't know, Canex or something like that. But it has literally 2 billion per day throwing through it, which is a small amount, but it's got over $1.5 trillion worth of transactions processed since its launch. And look, like I said, JPMorgan has $10 trillion worth of transactions run through its hands literally every single day. So it's a major payment processor, right? We've, heard ad nauseum how, you want to use Bitcoin to avoid Visa, MasterCard, all these kind of, payment processors fees. Well, if you have a giant bank like this, they can very well start to, implement, let's call it something like this in order to get what, let's say, get what's the right word here? Develop this payment rails and the payment infrastructure, right? Because Jamie Dimon and JPMorgan, they don't want to lose this power. They realize hey, being a banking charter is extremely beneficial. They realize this is a huge moneymaker. And the more people that opt out of the Bitcoin system, well, this is where it gets potentially detrimental because they'll be losing some business, right? So JPMorgan tokenizing the dollar and advancing their payment infrastructure and utilizing AI for it all, right? I mean, these banking systems, they all really just work very slowly at the end of the day. But, once JPMorgan really starts to advance its payments innovation, this is where it's going to get interesting, folks. This is where we'll start to see some things start to move very quickly, because the biggest thing that they have on here is the innovation, but it's with programmable payments, right? So read that again, programmable. You guys in the chat knows what this means, but it means that it is all, right? The ability to control it. They can program the rules into every transactions. This payment can only go here. This wallet can transact with this approved address. This account is flagged for suspicious activity. Now, when you look at how these dots are being connected here, now JPMorgan could potentially have the ability to just watch how this $10 trillion of payments per day, where that is going, right? So let's connect the dots here. We have a 3-layered control system that they're just being built, right? The first layer of all of this is stablecoins, right? So JPMorgan's creating their own, but we also have Circle, Tether, Ripple. All of these guys are now creating their own stablecoin or have their own stablecoin. The second layer to all of this is the payment rails. So we've got JPMorgan building the Kinexus blockchain, which has $10 million per day as a payment engine. It'll be connected to that public blockchain or Coinbase's base, and it'll have the programmable payments, which in the end, which would be controllable. And so the result will still be that the plumbing of the monetary system and the monetary network will still be through the banking system. And then the last layer is that governmental control, because we already have Howard Lubnick, who owns 5% of Tether, who's now in the government. We've got Brandon Lubnick, who is Howard Lubnick's son, who is now taken over as the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, who is the custodian for Tether, and their United States bonds and everything else. And then you have a working group on digital asset markets, which are essentially writing the regulations, which have been leaving the private sector or the public sector, as in governments, and joining the quote unquote private sector, such as Tether. And then you have the Genius Act and all of this legal framework that's being lined out and being created by these people who are leaving leaving the public sector and going into private sector, or vice versa. They're essentially just switching spots here and working very closely intertwined. So the plumbing infrastructure of all of this is that the people writing the rules now own that infrastructure. So don't you see a pattern here? They're not fighting Bitcoin or crypto. They're trying to lean and push people towards using stablecoins. This is why we saw the stablecoin conference, so to speak, at the Bitcoin conference this past year, where all of the regulators came up and said, stablecoin this, stablecoin that, stablecoin this. So, when Tether becomes a bank and the Ludnick family is controlling it under regulations that the Ludnick family helped write, you don't think that they'll use that power, right? I mean, if you've looked at it or looked closely before, I mean, you've already seen that this is a potential and this has happened, right? Because Tether has already taken fire as a UN says it's stablecoin's preferred choice as a $17 billion in Asian crime rackets, right? Because they've already taken fire saying all of this, saying, hey, we are, these are the headlines, right? Stablecoins are being used for drug trafficking and everything else. But when you keep on seeing how these guys are just promoting stablecoins, you act like there is some sort of criminal activity, like, drugs, trafficking, ransomware. But you know what else is on this list is some sanction evasions. So who decides what these sanctions are, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's the U.S. government, the Commerce Department. So the Commerce Department, who runs that? Howard Lubnick. So what stablecoin does he control? Tether. So let me paint you a scenario here. The government doesn't like a country. They sanction it. Tether is now a bank, is now required to freeze transactions for that country. So the government doesn't like a person in another scenario. So they flag them. Circle's now a bank. They freeze their USDC. Tether freezes their USDT. JPMorgan payment rails are blocked to the transaction. And the last scenario is, the government just wants to track everything. So it has the programmable payment rails, built-in surveillance on every transaction. And all that's logged, analyzed, and flagged, by an algorithm or AI. And they say that this is quote unquote just for criminals. But remember what's happened here recently, right? We've seen the Canadian truckers. They were just protesting mandates, right, to get the jab. Governments didn't like that protest, so they froze their bank accounts. There was no trial, no warning. It was just frozen. Now, the banks, that was banks doing that, right? And if you look back and remember some of the things going on here, that wasn't, all just banks, right? I mean, there were some people that were using crypto to send all that. And I believe 80% or 75% of all the crypto that was being obtained was not Bitcoin, but the ones that was able to keep and they weren't able to track was Bitcoin. So I think when you look at it, right, Diamond always promotes Bitcoin if he's got some needs to dump on retail. Exactly, right? I mean, you can use stablecoins to buy Bitcoin. I mean, that's what a lot of these countries have done. Allegedly, that's how Venezuela was able to get a stockpile of Bitcoin, was they were able to use stablecoins. So I do think that there are rails for this, but to say that stablecoins are completely different than than just the overall banking system, I think is just false, right? Because all of these major crypto companies are now becoming banks. They're fitting in with those regulations. Now, if you want to get some and stack some non-KYC sats, you can do that pretty easily with simple mining. My friends over at Simple Mining will help you mine Bitcoin and help you do it easily. You can get a year free of repairs if you go to simplemining.io/greencandle. Not only that, but taking a step farther than that, they can help you with tax depreciation, write-offs. You can get depreciation that you could get similarly in real estate by getting a Bitcoin miner and by stacking non-KYC sats. I have 4 miners going right now. So I get paid out, and I get my non-KYC stack. And I absolutely love it. These guys are awesome. Book a call with them if this is something that interests you. At the very least, just book a call so you could figure out if it is a good fit, because there's so many banking industries or so many crypto companies that are now just becoming banks at the end of the day. And, we've seen the Senate go through different hearings. Even last year, Howard Lubnick was grilled by Senator Cynthia Lummis about Tether. So at the end of the day, yeah, hey, look at this. Senator Elizabeth Warren was grilling Howard Lubnick about this. And I don't agree with 99% of what she says, but I think it is interesting to do this because he was grilled about it, his conflicts of interest and his control of Tether. And, on TV, Bloomberg said I've seen a whole lot, and the firm has seen a whole lot, and they have the money. Tether has every penny, and it can produce liquidity on a moment's notice. And it was confident with all of this, but Cantor Fitzgerald is not conducting continuous diligence on Tether's financial statements. And he said they can't do that, right? They don't have the people and the manpower for all that. But he said, but I believe my statements were accurate. So if you caught all of his quote, he said that they're not conducting continuous diligence. And I mean, to be honest, it's not really, let's say, advantageous to think that they were, especially when you have a $94,000 asset and Bitcoin's starting to pump here, right? When you have this kind of asset here pumping and you see how the plumbing is changing, you would think that more of these stablecoin issuers, they're going to keep watching all of this, right? So make sure you guys are hitting that like button like Cheech and Chong. Subscribe to the channel. And I've also got a Skool community that I'm starting up. If you guys are interested, go down to the bottom of the link in the description. I'm going to be writing something every single week on how I was able to retire early on Bitcoin. I'll give you guys strategies, tax strategies, how I'm looking at the markets and all of that. So be sure to join that if it's something that interests you. The first 100 people will get an exclusive rate. And then after that, the price will go up. So please join it, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.